Welcome to episode 13 of this series on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Last time we heard the rest of the monster's tale, and how he was the true murderer of Frankenstein's younger brother William. During their talk, the monster places responsibility for the murder at the feet of humanity, and more specifically, the feet of Frankenstein.
At the beginning of chapter 15, we move back up, away from the monster's eloquent narrative, into the familiar ground of Frankenstein's narrative. While the preceding sections were presented through the voice of the creature, this chapter is once again told from the biased perspective of Frankenstein. Importantly for the reader though, Frankenstein's descriptions and encounters with the monster will, from now on, be coloured by what we learned about him in his own narrative.
This doesn't stop Frankenstein from immediately distancing himself from the monster, however. Immediately, the chapter begins with Frankenstein's statement that the being finished speaking. From the first sentence, the monster becomes a being, not a human, and Shelley re-establishes the dynamics of power that have been present throughout the novel so far.
Frankenstein does his best to come to terms with the monster's request that Frankenstein must construct a female mate, and engages a range of emotions which at once acknowledge his responsibility towards the creature, but also makes us aware how Frankenstein cannot bring himself to create life again. He reminds himself, and us, that the monster murdered the innocent William, and was responsible for the death of a second innocent. It's a dilemma for Frankenstein, and he expresses as much to the monster.
The monster's response is immediate. He argues that he has no reason to respect life and death because so much contempt has been shown towards his own life and trials. Alone, he will only be able to mull on these insults and become more dangerous. As he says to Frankenstein, "I will revenge my injuries. If I cannot inspire love, I will cause fear, and chiefly towards you, my arch-enemy. Because, my creator, do I swear inextinguishable hatred. Have a care. I will work at your destruction, nor finish until I desolate your heart, so that you curse the hour of your birth."
This is a clear ultimatum to Frankenstein. He has created a monster who hates and despises him, and will stop at nothing to cause him the same amount of pain and despair. It's Frankenstein's responsibility as a parent, the monster argues, to provide a companion for his creature. In the eyes of the monster, this companion will help reduce the monster's sense of isolation and therefore reduce his urge to murder.
There are clear parallels between the monster's case for a companion and the creation of the first man and woman in Genesis. The monster paints a romantic picture of how he and his companion will live. "I will go to the vast wilds of South America. My food is not that of man. I do not destroy the lamb and the kid to glut my appetite. Acorns and berries afford me sufficient nourishment. My companion will be of the same nature as myself, and will be content with the same fare. We shall make our bed of dried leaves. The sun will shine on us as on a man, and will ripen our food."
By presenting Frankenstein with the option to build or not to build, the monster is once again giving Frankenstein the power of life and death. Not just because he will be creating new life, but also because he will be saving others from death at the hands of the monster. Eventually, this argument works on Frankenstein, and he decides it's right for him to create the companion.
"His words had a strange effect upon me. I compassionated him, and sometimes felt a wish to console him. But when I looked upon him, when I saw the filthy mass that moved and talked, my heart sickened, and my feelings were altered to those of horror and hatred. I tried to stifle these sensations. I thought that as I could not sympathize with him, I had no right to withhold from him the small portion of happiness which was yet in my power to bestow." On the condition that the monster and his companion leave the world of men, which is interestingly located in the Eden-like exotic space or South America rather than the cold climates of continental Europe, Frankenstein agrees to build the companion. Committed, he descends the mountain, back towards the realm of mankind. But he's picked up some of the intertextual language which his monster favoured. He too makes allusions to Paradise Lost and Dante, referencing the hypocrites who are punished by the devil in one of the circles of hell.
This chapter represents Frankenstein's tangled battle with the questions of duty, morality, and fate. There can be no doubt that Victor is bound to the monster. Victor's realization that to reject this bond will ultimately condemn the rest of his family to death puts him in a constant state of torture.
Recognizing he is between a rock and a hard place, in Chapter 16, Frankenstein recommits himself to the creation of life in order to save the lives of his family. Ironically, in doing so, he retreats from the company of others and becomes much more a solitary creature like the monster. Noticing how withdrawn Frankenstein has become, his father suggests that now might be the time for Victor and Elizabeth to be married.
Once again, we have these paralleled lives. At the same time as Frankenstein is building a partner for the monster, it's suggested that he too needs one. In both cases, a female companion is put forward as a source of happiness, life, and light.
Once again, then, the chapter highlights the passive role of women in the novel. Elizabeth is the object of discussion, but is never wholly present. To the point that at the end of the chapter, we see her stating that she cannot travel with Frankenstein because she doesn't have the ability nor the narrative agency. Throughout this entire text, women have very little agency and are often simply held up as ideal, two-dimensional characters. Shelley herself is, of course, a woman. What do you think she's trying to say? And what does it say about the novel as a whole?
Frankenstein departs on his self-imposed exile, promising himself that he will return to his family as a free man. He's not alone for long, however, as he's soon met by his old friend, Henry Clerval. The two characters could not be more different, as Frankenstein points out.
Alas, how great was the contrast between us. He was alive to every new scene, joyful when he saw the beauties of the setting sun, and more happy when he beheld it rise and recommence a new day. He pointed out to me the shifting colours of the landscape and the appearances of the sky.
Unlike Frankenstein, Clerval is able to experience the true joy of travel, and serves as a contrast to Victor's dour thoughts, as well as contrasting with a younger form of Victor who was once filled with the same enthusiasm on his departure to university so many years ago.
Frankenstein takes time to reminisce about his beloved friend, describing him as being formed in the very poetry of nature. His soul overflowed with ardent affections, and his friendship was of that devoted and wondrous nature that the worldly-minded teach us to look for only in the imagination. This passage serves as a memorial for Clerval and highlights the best parts of his friend. That Clerval is spoken of in the past tense is a source of unease for us, however. Knowing how others close to Frankenstein have died, perhaps Clerval has suffered the same fate.
Towards the end of the chapter, Frankenstein confirms that Clerval has died, but the nature of his death is left a mystery. This ensures that we are filled with that classic sense of gothic dread, and we begin to wonder what precisely goes wrong, and whether the monster fulfills his promise of killing all who are dear to Frankenstein.
Chapter 16 begins with this shadow of doubt over it. Frankenstein and Clerval meet with great thinkers, but Frankenstein is unable to draw any joy from their conversations. This is in direct contrast with the young Victor, who revelled in knowledge. The monster has not only taken away some of the people who Frankenstein loves, he's also a drain on the activities that once brought him joy. Frankenstein describes how a blight has come over his existence, and he only visits with thinkers to help with his creation of the companion.
The pair slowly wind their way further north, travelling from London to Scotland's Highlands and Islands, with Frankenstein hoping that the rugged and sublime landscape will refuel him. Leaving Clerval in Edinburgh, He pushes on.
I traversed the Northern Highlands and fixed on one of the remotest of the Orkneys as the scene of my labours. It was a place fitted for such a work, being hardly more than a rock, whose high sides were continually beaten upon by the waves. For us readers, the move by Frankenstein into an increasingly sublime and isolated landscape is a clue. Whenever the sublime is invoked in the novel, it is a sign that some terrifying or horrific act is imminent. Also, the extreme north is connected to the extremes of knowledge. Once again, Frankenstein is moving to the limits. We as readers can only infer that this means danger and imminent tragedy.
Frankenstein's recounting of his time in the Orkney Islands is saturated with references to light and dark. At the boundary of knowledge once more, he allows himself to think back to the night when he created the monster for the first time.
As I sat, a train of reflection occurred to me, which led me to consider the effects of what I was now doing. 3 years before, I was engaged in the same manner, and had created a fiend whose unparalleled barbarity had desolated my heart, and filled it forever with the bitterest remorse. These thoughts quickly turn to doubt, and Frankenstein worries what the outcome of creating a second monster might be. He had sworn to quit the neighborhood of man and hide himself in deserts, but she had not. And she, who in all probability was to become a thinking and reasoning animal, might refuse to comply with a compact made before her creation. Overcome by his fear of what the monster's companion may do, ironically investing the lifeless female body with more agency than that of the living Elizabeth, Victor struggles with two conflicting senses of duty. One to the monster, his creation, another to humanity which he should protect.
Frankenstein is paralysed by indecision until he spots the monster at the window watching him. Frankenstein sees malice written across the monster's face and, seized by a sudden fury, tears apart the companion.
The wretch saw me destroy the creature on whose future existence he depended for happiness, and with a howl of devilish despair and revenge, withdrew.
The monster also leaves Frankenstein with a final and ominous promise that he will see Victor on his wedding night.
Frankenstein's destruction of the companion marks the loss of the monster's one hope for company and community. In defying the monster, Victor ends the monster's control over him, and also forcibly rejects the presence of an important female character from the novel.
However, aware as we are of the mirroring throughout this novel between Frankenstein and the monster, we must now fear for the life of Elizabeth. Victor has taken the monster's love. Now, we wonder, will the monster do the same for him?
This thought has not occurred to Frankenstein, however, and he revels in his newfound freedom. He destroys his equipment and returns to the mainland. His boat becomes disrupted by a violent storm, and upon his arrival in Ireland, some hundreds of miles away from the Scottish Highlands, he is arrested under suspicion of killing a man whose body was found washed ashore a night before his arrival.
Frankenstein actually pauses the narrative at this point, reminding us that the entire story is being told within his own frame. This pulling back from the story also acts as a clue to the reader that we're moving towards the end of Frankenstein's narrative and making our final return to Walton's.
When we resume, at the beginning of chapter 18, Frankenstein is taken to see the body of the man who washed ashore. Recognizing it as Clerval, he falls into violent convulsions and remembers the whole scene to Walton with fevered horror. I feel yet parched with horror, nor can I reflect on that terrible moment without shuddering and agony that faintly reminds me of the anguish of the recognition. The trial, the presence of the magistrate and witnesses, passed like a dream from my memory when I saw the lifeless form of Henry Clerval stretched before me. I gasped for breath.
The whole scene is recalled by Frankenstein with a feverish horror. He explains to Walton that he cannot recall the trial itself, so overcome was he with grief. While in Ireland, Victor's fever lasts for 2 months, and during that time, he confesses to the murder of not just Clerval, but William and Justine as well. This is an acceptance that he is, at least indirectly, responsible for the actions of the monster, and his realization that he is not yet free of the creature.
After months of suffering, Frankenstein is found not guilty of the death of Clerval, and his father comes to bring him back to Geneva. While his father is enraptured with happiness that Frankenstein is innocent, Victor only becomes more despondent. The cup of life was poisoned forever, and although the sun shone upon me, as upon the happy and gay of heart, I saw around me nothing but a dense and frightful darkness, penetrated by no light but the glimmer of 2 eyes that glared upon me.
At the end of this chapter, Frankenstein is coming to the realization that nowhere is safe, nothing is a comfort, he cannot rest, find solace or happiness, and his family is in danger as long as the monster lives.
That's it for this episode. Join us next episode for Victor's homecoming, his marriage to Elizabeth, and the events which drag Frankenstein back to the north.